So the context really is, this is the third meeting in a series. We set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland basically 4 years ago. So this is the third meeting, but there was 1 year that was missed. And we've held one meeting in Dublin, which was hosted by Sean English, who's come up from Dublin, at the Free University of Ireland with Sarah Scott and the Heron, which was a small but very interesting meeting, I think, discussion. And then previous to that, we had one in Holyhead on the Isle of Anglesey. So my interest in peacemaking and reconciliation comes from my philosophical interest as a philosopher looking at peace issues. My specialism is in the philosophy of religions, and one of the things I've been doing in recent years is teaching religious studies in the secondary school sector, as well as lecturing at university. And I do feel that Ireland is partly it's a religious conflict. We can talk about that later, but I'm very interested in unpicking, the split between Protestant and Catholic, between different aspects of religion. At the heart of the work I think we're trying to do is what I call theological reconciliation, which is why, in a sense, it's symbolic to meet here in Crane's house in Belfast, a group of Christians pledged to non-violence. So I think one of the questions we'll be discussing today, is there a possibility of theological reconciliation? Is there, or are Protestants and Catholics always, till the day of doom, going to be at each other's throats by definition? I'd like to see the thinking that's gone into violence decommissioned, not just the guns themselves, because people will always get more guns if the mindsets are not healed and decommissioned. And I know that in the last few months there's been a resurfacing, a bubbling of some of the tensions, and maybe we can talk about that a bit, why that's come up.
This Northern Ireland peace process, or the Belfast Agreement, or Good Friday Agreement, whatever you want to call it, is replicated, praised, I would say even admired, venerated all over the world. And you name it, each of now and again, a president and a prime minister gets up and say, oh, can you see that community after 30 years or whatever violence, they're living in peace? You've got to learn from them. What I'm trying to say to us sitting here, that you got a miracle at hand. That's what I would say, for short of anything else. A miracle, what you have achieved here, which I would like to be replicated in Sri Lanka, in Darfur.
At weekends, I cover the weekends here for both the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Justice. I'm a kind of a one-horse wonder, and the result, I attend various events or whatever has to be done. The British Irish Secretariat looks after the remnants of the relationships that exist between Britain and Ireland, which there's a devolution process ongoing at the moment, where powers are being devolved to the Northern Ireland's. The main sort of stuff that I deal with are policing and justice issues. That's to be the main topical interest, and also generally the situation in relation to parading. We would maintain an interest in that and try and have contacts with both sides of the community and that sort of thing.
And it has done more than others, especially in recent years when Northern Ireland has seemed to be such, quote-unquote, a switch-off subject. That while the newsrooms in London, or the news organisations in London have closed their Belfast offices, and the other Dublin papers have closed the Belfast offices, we're still here. And we're still here writing on a subject that is deemed by a great number of people to be very, very unsexy indeed, and that they'd rather deal with it by ignoring it, and we don't let them do that.
All my friends in the area that I lived in were Protestants. But as the troubles went on, they seemed to distance themselves, the vast majority of them anyway. And it culminated one time in a bit of a row in the street, and a crowd of kids arrived at the house. And my mother went out and spoke specifically to one of them and said, I'm not mentioning his name, you lived your life in our house, And he said, that was before you turned it into an IRA stronghold. So the sort of alienation between myself and the friends that I had run about with was almost complete. There was still some that, you know, where we retained a relationship, but by and large, there had been a serious estrangement there. So, and this culminated then in an incident in around, I think it was 1973, but I'm not completely sure about it. Someone arrived at my house, I was 14 or 15 at the time, to shoot me. It was loyalists. I wasn't in the house at the time, but they had asked for me by name and fired shots into the house. And the result was that we had to up and leave our house the very next day. And we then moved into, my grandmother lived on Falls Road, so we moved in with her for a few months until we got our own house. I'd say not long after that I joined n-Iarchimí, which was the youth wing of the IRA. And when I was 17, I joined the IRA itself. I was involved in numerous operations against the British Army and against the RUC. Was also involved in the economic bombing campaign of Belfast city centre. I was arrested in 1978 and charged with causing an explosion in the city centre and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And when the British reneged on the commitments they had given to the hunger strikers, Bobby Sands decided that he would have another hunger strike, and again asked for volunteers, and I again put my own name forward. And I was on hunger strike then up until the 3rd of October 1981, when the hunger strike was ended. At that stage I had been 55 days on hunger strike. I was very seriously ill. I was almost totally blind. I weighed about 7 stone. I was totally jaundiced. I was eventually released in 1987. I rejoined the IRA when I was released and was rearrested again in 1989, charged with attempting to kill members of the Crown Forces, and was sentenced to 24 years imprisonment. I was then released in 1988 as part of the Good Friday Agreement. Had it not been for the Good Friday Agreement, I would only have been released last year. And since then, I have been involved politically with Sinn Féin, and more recently, just at the start of June, I took up the job as legacy coordinator for Coiste n-Iarchimí. That's the umbrella group that represents Republican ex-prisoners.
I have trouble with the notion of truth and reconciliation. As I said earlier, I mean, I think that they are both really important issues and they can be addressed, and I don't think there's an end to either of them. You never have complete truth really, but I still think it's a process and you continue to work at it. And reconciliation, I don't really, you know, reconciliation, this is where South Africa got into trouble, because there's different types of reconciliation. There's personal reconciliation, there's community, there's national, and the type of reconciliation that was worked on in South Africa, one, it was never defined in the mandate or in the workings of the Commission, and even people within the Commission were working on different levels of different types of reconciliation. My take would be primarily more political and social, but I see the need and the value of other aspects. And I think when you tie truth and reconciliation together, really unless you address the causes of conflict, then you'll never get there.
First of all, I just want to say something Pat said this morning, how he doesn't hold a grudge against the prison warders that held him captive and abused him. I think that's incredible. And you mentioned Nelson Mandela, how he could walk out of prison and forgive those who had held him captive. That for me is human nature at its best, and I think you call it a miracle that he was able to do that. I think that's an interesting perspective to look at, is how people can do that, human nature and forgiveness. And I don't think truth in this circumstance is relevant unless there is forgiveness. You can talk about truth, but unless there's forgiveness, you won't accept what other people have done to you.
The next thing is most important, which I feel can finish, all the troubles and animosities in Ireland, is establish the Bill of Rights. And it is a part of the Good Friday Agreement to establish, because it can make a new beginning for Northern Ireland.
We don't seem to have a strategy or a policy or how we do peace. We know how to do
There's no thinking
well,
in this.
but we don't really know how to make it happen on the other side, and that whole thing has got us thinking quite deeply.
As regards to dealing with the past, what our role has been most recently is trying to further the debate in relation to Ames Bradley and to the report that came out. It was to consult with society, wider society, about how to deal with the past and what people wanted, and they consulted with individuals and organisations for about 18 months and then put together their report. And it was unfortunately hijacked in a sense by one recommendation that was perceived to probably be maybe the most contentious issue, because it made a recommendation for the families and of all the individuals who had been killed during the conflict to receive a sum of money as recognition of the loss that the family had endured. And that just caused a great deal of conflict. So in a sense, what happened on the back of that, the government responded by saying, without consulting, well, we definitely will not go forward with that recommendation. And in fact, we're just not really going to say much of anything about the rest of the report. And there was very little that happened within society in the months that followed. Very, very little was said and done. And again, when it has been said and done, it's primarily always been focused on the recognition payment, which is unfortunate. So, which is why CHA, British Irish Rights Watch, and the two universities decided to have this conference to get people talking, to get the debate going, to not let the British government decide what they wanted to do when it in fact was for society to decide.
Maybe you could reflect, just to conclude, philosophically, the problem both of these conflicts have, but this one, is about clashes of identity and power and legitimacy and recognition. You know, in a sense, none of us really know who we are, do we? But we have labels, we have roles given through our upbringing, through our socialisation and stuff, which then clash with other people. Why can't we get to a place of, divine not knowing, or whatever you want to call it, whereby we can sit down with each other and wonder together about the human condition?
Well, you see, probably the most important word you mentioned there was power. And I mean, what happens in the conflict here? One part of the community was discriminated against. It was discriminated against not so much, I believe, on the basis of its religion, but on the basis of its political allegiance. And it was discriminated against in every walk of life, in employment, education, and housing. Whatever walk of life they were discriminated against. And when that situation prevails, what it amounts to is a collective humiliation of a community. And I mean, people ask me, looking back now, would you still do what you did then? And I just happen to believe that when there's a confluence of certain conditions, and first of all, first condition is, there has been for 800 years an ongoing conflict between the British and Irish. There has been physical force conflict, so we're in that situation. We add on to that the creation of the six-county state, in which people who come from that sort of republican tradition are, discriminated against and effectively humiliated. They're demonised. There's attempts to criminalise them. And when that situation prevails, I mean, it's part of the human condition that people go to war.